Hello, everybody. Welcome to our panel discussion. Thank you all for joining. I'm Brandy Noneke. I'm the director of the Citrus Policy Lab here at UC Berkeley, an associate research professor at the Goldman School of Public Policy, and a co-faculty director at the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology. I work on platform governance issues, so this documentary is very near and dear to my heart and reminds me of the importance of my work in this space. So the way the panel is going to go, I'm going to introduce each of the speakers. We'll have about a 45-minute discussion, and then there will be a 15-minute Q&A. You'll see the mics here down at the front of the room. Please hold your question and go to the mic because we are recording this. So we, of course, want to catch your question on tape. So let me introduce Alex Winter is a director, writer, and actor who has worked across film, television, and theater, appearing on Broadway, right? Winter founded Trooper Productions in 2006 and has released several documentaries under that banner. Winter has appeared, as I said, on Broadway and in the cult classic films The Lost Boys and the Bill and Ted franchise. Next to him is Erwin Chemerinsky, who is Dean and Distinguished Professor of Law at Berkeley Law. He frequently argues appellate cases, including before the United States Supreme Court on First Amendment issues. And finally, Hani Farid is professor here at UC Berkeley as well, with a joint appointment at Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences and the School of Information. His research focuses on digital forensics, forensic science, misinformation, image analysis, and human perception. So I'm going to open it up with a couple of questions. And as you probably noticed in the documentary, something called Section 230 was commented on a lot. So I will give a breakdown of Section 230. Not that I'm not an expert in my own right, but doing it in front of the dean of a law school, where I will be discussing two prominent cases. We'll see if he raises an eyebrow.
Intimidation factor across
it is, exactly. So Alex, I'd love to start with you.
Oh, great.
What were the origins of your interest in this space? You know, like why were you called to make this documentary?
COVID and the Trump era sort of erupted, and YouTube played a huge part in that. And that found its way heavily into our story.
Yeah. And Hani, you live in this space as well, and I work closely with you, and I know how much of a critic you are of social media. And sometimes we disagree on how much liability those platforms should face. Yeah. I'm curious, how did this film land on you? Has it changed your perspective? Are you even stronger pushing back against the platforms?
I liked a lot of things about the film, but one of them is when I first talked to Alex about this, it was not a hit piece. He was not going after YouTube, which I think is very easy to do. And I think he also made the point that in the discussion about the harms of social media, most of the discussions was Facebook. You rarely saw YouTube being discussed, and I've always been mystified by that, because I think in some ways YouTube is even more powerful. So how did it land for me? Here's what I remember when I watched it, you sent me a pre-release of it, and I don't think I can take every snippet of that documentary and I say, yeah, I probably knew that. But when I saw it all together over a 90-minute period, it landed really heavy, like in a really heavy way. And I remember telling my wife this too, like, man, that was dark. And I think you even told me it gets dark somewhere in there.
Yeah, I think you emailed me like 20 minutes in and were like, oh, this is great. I was like, oh, no.
Yeah, I hadn't gotten to that part yet. That's right. I think that's exactly.
I was like, call me after.
And I think I did. I think at the 40-minute mark, I'm like, oh, shit.
You're like,
so I think it reinforced a lot of the ideas and a lot of the concerns I've had. I do think it did move me in one way, and I was telling Alex in the back there that Erwin has also moved me a little bit on my thinking, is that it did help me appreciate some of the positive aspects of the tech more, and I think I tend not to see that very much. And there are positive aspects to the tech, and I think it did sort of both. It sort of made me even more concerned for the harms, but also made me appreciate some of the upside.
Yeah, so how might we actually harness this technology in a way or regulate it in a way that we can receive those great benefits while mitigating those risks? Dean Chemerinsky, we've heard you talk a lot about how social media and platforms has really been a boon to free expression. Now, with free expression, there comes also awful but lawful speech. So how do we balance both of these tensions, and do you think this was a natural phenomenon that YouTube would end up creating these conspiracy theories and harmful content?
If we allow more speech, we're allowing more good speech, and we're allowing more bad speech. I think that the internet and social media are the most important developments with regard to expression since the printing press. They radically changed the nature of free speech. It used to be to reach a mass audience, you need to be rich enough to own a printing press or get a broadcast license. Now, as your documentary shows, anybody who's got a smartphone or access to a modem has the potential to reach a large audience. And they can reach a large audience with really good, uplifting speech, where they can reach a large audience with very hateful speech, paranoid speech, and speech that can do real harm. I don't think anyone will come up with a way to have the good speech but not the bad speech without doing harm to the whole notion of the First Amendment.
Before we started talking, I put a little bug in their ear about an issue I wanted to discuss. And I'm really happy, Erwin, that you said it creates both good speech and bad speech. But it's clear we are focusing a lot more on the bad speech, I think, and for a good reason, right? We need to focus on documenting and mitigating this bad speech. But I also wonder if it's part of the natural human condition to focus on bad speech, to click on those things that just, how could anybody say that? That's terrible, awful, this just kind of rubbernecking that we have. And so thinking about that, now I'm going to go into the history lesson about bad speech and about Section 230. So in the 1990s, you know, the internet is starting to grow. I have a Tamagotchi. Hani, you have a Walkman, probably, just running around with that. The internet is...
Ouch.
Yeah, you did, though.
I did.
You did.
I
Me
did.
too.
Fine.
Yeah. And like not the CD one where you have to run with it like this. You
No, it was
can't
a
turn
cassette,
it.
actually.
Yeah,
it was
cassette.
Not a
I-
CD.
yeah, that's right. This
But
is
then
how
the
old
CD
I am.
one.
Yeah.
Cassette, that's right.
So did
Well,
I.
sorry. Okay, so at this time in the 1990s, the internet, you know, it becomes a thing, and we have the big .com bubble and everything happening. At that time, there were two really important cases that happened in New York. So this is where I start sweating. Thank God I'm not wearing my Apple Watch, because last time it told me, like, are you okay? Your heart rate is going too fast, as I say this in front of Erwin. But there's two cases, Cubby v. CompuServe and Stratton Oakmont v. Prodigy. These two cases had totally different outcomes. So for Cubby v. CompuServe, content that was posted to this platform where they were moderating the content, it was claimed a defamatory statement, and because that platform was moderating the content, they were deemed to be liable for that defamatory content. Now, Stratton Oakmont v. Prodigy on that platform, an anonymous user posted, we all remember Wolf of Wall Street and Stratton Oakmont. Do y'all remember? Okay, so they posted, there's something fishy going on at Stratton Oakmont. I think this should be looked into. And of course, the individuals at Stratton Oakmont wanted to sue Prodigy, saying this is a defamatory statement. But in that, because they did not moderate the content, then they wouldn't be held liable. So there's this clear tension between, well, who is liable for this content and who is not liable? Speaking of bad content, simultaneously, there are people on Capitol Hill who are becoming increasingly concerned that this newfangled internet thing, that children are going to be exposed to indecent and harmful content. Enters the Communications Decency Act that was first introduced in 1995. But you really cover this issue in the documentary
Yes.
about
As a
Section
debate.
230, yes.
Yes.
So YouTube and other big social media companies, like, what do we do? How do we, Section 230 has been taken out of context in many ways,
Yes.
I think, in cases where it's like clearly harmful content and a violation of their terms of service. But
Sure.
what can we do in this space? Can it be amended in any useful way?
I'm a great person to start because I'm the least expert person here. So I would not want to
But
follow.
you might think outside the box,
But
right? We're constrained by our disciplines.
I actually have a lot of opinions about 230, a lot. I think that from a punter's perspective, who's been around the net for a while, we have to remember that 230 is not just protection for Google and Facebook, it's protection for everybody who has any content on the internet, every mom and pop site. If you're an abortion rights advocate and you're putting forward information, especially now post-Dobbs, on how to access reproductive care or abortion care, you're being protected by 230, right? Mm-hmm. There's a reason why a lot of the people who have been arguing to complete, and this is not to say it's a blanket issue, because I understand it's not. But the reason, if I get into fights about 230 out of this realm, which is where I live, it is most likely to be with full-on MAGA far-right people who want to dismantle 230 because they know it can be used to implement censorship. They know that if they can break 230, they can silence a huge swath of the population that they do not want talking and having, as Erwin said, this incredible platform to democratize their ability to communicate. There goes anyone left talking about abortion. There goes trans rights organizations. There goes an enormous amount of grassroots political organizing, as well as most mom and pop websites. Because unlike the mom and pop websites, if you are now litigating or if you're now held liable for whatever your content is online, who's got the biggest lawyers that can fight that? Google, Facebook, the biggest companies, the people probably the least endangered by dismantling 230 are the very people that we want to dismantle it because of, which in my opinion is at the heart of a lot of the problem with regulation and legislation around the internet, full stop today, whether it's the EU, the UK, COSA bill here, the Kids Online Safety Act. And again, this isn't like, I'm just planting my little flag in the sand in terms of sort of my view of the delicacy with which we will have to deal with regulating the internet and the danger that we face if we use a blunt instrument of actually harming the people that we're trying to help and empowering the people that we're trying to disempower.
And this couldn't be a better segue to the lawyer here. A blunt instrument, I think, is a term used often in the legal jargon, actually. But Dean Chemerinsky, how could we possibly amend Section 230 without running afoul of violating the First Amendment?
I haven't seen a proposal to amend Section 230 that I think would be desirable. I'm a strong supporter of Section 230. It does a couple of things, and this is pointed out in the film. One, which gets less emphasis, is it protects the social media platforms when they take down information. And all of the platforms take down a huge amount of information, false information, hateful information, and of course information that's not protected by the First Amendment, such as incitement of illegal activity, child sex exploitation material. And I think we want to protect the platforms when they're taking down this material. In fact, I wish they would take down even more of this kind of material than they're now taking down. The other thing Section 230 does, of course, say that the platforms can't be held liable for what's posted there. Imagine that it were different, and imagine the platforms could be held much more easily liable for what's there. They would then have to engage in much more content moderation. When you're talking of billions of things being posted each day, if they had to be much more cautious, I don't believe the internet could function as it does now. What's interesting, Brandy, in answer to your question, is that the proposals to change Section 230 are very different whether you talk and look at what conservatives say or what liberals say. Florida and Texas adopted laws that prohibit social media platforms from engaging in content moderation. It's exactly what you said in terms of conservatives don't want content moderation. Those cases are going to go to the Supreme Court this year in all likelihood. And I hope the Supreme Court will agree with what the federal court did as of Florida and say that these laws are unconstitutional, that social media platforms can, should have the First Amendment right to determine what to take down. On the other hand, what liberals want is much more in the way of content moderation, especially with regard to hateful speech or some of the things were portrayed in the film. And so states like California and New York have done more to try to encourage content moderation. Brandy, in answer to your question, I don't see the happy medium of how we can change Section 230 to be able to protect speeches it provides for without really undermining the internet.
Yeah.
These are the words that made the internet, to take the name of a book.
Yeah, the 26 words
Right.
that created the internet by Jeff Kosef, which I think he owes me some money because I'm always plugging his book.
I bought it because of you.
I know, exactly. But Hani, do you have any ideas of how Section 230 could be amended? And if not, how might we incentivize platforms to do a better job?
So I'll be really curious what Alex and Erwin think about this. I think the debate on 230 has completely missed the point. I think we can't talk about this in terms of content, because I agree with you, and I agree with you also, is that once we get in the business of saying we want to moderate content, the government can't be in that business without running afoul. I think, though, that the way the courts have interpreted 230 have moved so far away from Brandy's very nice description about the way the internet used to work in the late 90s. In the late 90s, the way the internet worked is you posted information online and other people commented on, and that was that. It was literally, we were talking about this even in the 80s, the BBSs, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That's not how the internet works today. If I go to YouTube today, for example, and I just launch the page, it immediately says, watch this, watch this, watch this, watch this, without me asking for anything. If I watch a video, it will automatically queue up another video. That is not a choice. That was a choice that they made. In fact, it was a design choice. And I think if you design a product that you knew or should have known was going to lead to harm, the design itself is the issue, not the content. Let me give you one very concrete example. It's my favorite example of this around 230, which is Lemon v. Snap. So Snap had created what's called a speed filter in the app. And the way it worked is you take out your phone, you'd start recording a video, and it would superimpose your physical speed onto your video, and you were rewarded for higher speeds. What could possibly go wrong? So what happened is, because kids are mostly on this, they get in their car and they drive 120 miles an hour because they'd get rewarded by the design. Mm-hmm. And this, by the way, happened over and over and over again. Teenagers were killing themselves because they were driving while trying to get high speeds. Family sued Snap, and the lower court said, nope, you get 230 protection. This was a spectacularly dumb interpretation of 230. And in fact, the higher court said, wait a minute, this has nothing to do with content. This is a design issue. You designed a product that you knew or should have known was going to encourage reckless behavior. And importantly, and this is incredibly important, is that the Ninth Circuit didn't say Snap is liable. They just said you don't get the shield. That's it. So I think the way you deal with this is you say when the design of the product is the issue, not the content, I just don't think you get the shield. I'm not even saying they're liable, by the way, for the design. I just think we should focus the shield on something very specific. And when the products are radicalizing by pushing content, pushing you down content, or trying to make the product more addictive, which leads to mental health, that's a design issue, and I think we should adjudicate that as if it's a design. And Erwin's about to disagree with me.
I know, I can see him.
Because I could see him shaking his head for the last 5 minutes. Okay.
I don't think you can draw a distinction between content and design. I'll take the last example you mentioned, where you say, well, if it makes it addictive, that's design, not content. What that means is it's written in a way to make it more likely you're going to stay on the platform and keep going, then that's thought to be design rather than content. No, it's the content that's there that keeps you going. Every book that is written that wants to keep you reading the next chapter will finish one chapter with some kind of a cliffhanger so you want to go on to the next. I'm watching the made-for-TV show Hijack now. Each episode starts so you want to come back and watch the next episode. That's the content. That's not the design. I think that there are reasons why you could hold liability in the Snap case, but I don't think it's about content rather than design. There were cases long before the internet about radio stations that did giveaways that encouraged reckless behavior, and they were able to be held liable. I think we can do that with regard to Snap, but I think it's the content of it that is causing this, and to call it design is just to attach a different label to that part of the content.
But it's, can I?
Yeah, so if you're like, Brandy and I were not that about this,
yeah,
so I think she's on my side. It's halfway.
Between you
I
two.
know.
But I do think, like, I'm going back to my PhD training, Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. You can't separate, I agree with you, you can't separate the content from how it's communicated. Those two things are related to each other. You're gonna...
I'm going to disagree with that.
I know you
will.
will. You always do. Okay, but this is why it's good to work with somebody you have a nice, healthy, adversarial relationship with. But this idea of, but the book and these examples, it's different in that YouTube is purposely trying to radicalize people. But I'm also sympathetic to YouTube in that I don't think that they realized this at the beginning. And we also need to blame the users. The users have caught on to this, and they're continuing to create content that's clickbaity. You saw some of the horrible imagery and videos on there. They're taking advantage of these mental heuristics that human beings have. There's two that are very important here. Affect. We have just a natural tendency to pay attention to things that are scary, shocking, right? You drive past a car accident, all of us look at the car accident. Neighbors are fighting again, we're all looking, right? We have this propensity to do that. So that's the affect heuristic. Tied to that is availability heuristic. So if you continue to see those things over and over and over and over, now you start to think, oh, it's real, it's something because I'm seeing it everywhere. This happened post 9/11 when we had all of these conversations about terrorism and terrorist groups. The United States, as a country, started to believe more of this terrorism was happening. So I think it's thinking about how can we design these systems in a way that doesn't incentivize users to be creating this harmful content. And I do think that they have some responsibility in that.
I also think you can't discount the complicity. Whether you want to, and I won't, I'm not operating on your guys' legal level, so I won't get into the distinction between design and content, though I would agree that as far as the internet is concerned, design plays a very big part in how you process the content. And it is not unintentional. So there is a complicity. It is not, there's the fuzzy ground that we're in right now is often between the debate between those, and there are many reasons and sometimes political motives why someone will say, well, it's just human nature. This is just a reflection of the world. It's not the company's responsibility or accountability for the way human beings are deciding to upload whatever they upload. And they should be allowed, that should be allowed to self-police. And then there's another side that says, well, no, they are 100%, it's more like the automobile, right, which fought and fought and fought regulation until finally a seatbelt got put in it. And everyone said, oh, you're taking my freedoms away because I don't want the government to tell me I have to have a seatbelt. It's all the same arguments we're hearing now. And of course, many, many lives were saved. And I think that we're at a point, an inflection point is a kind of buzzy word for it, where I don't think we have the ability to dismiss the complicity or accountability, however we want to define it, however thorny the First Amendment issues are. I think that we are in a world that's a collision between where the automobile was before the seatbelt and where the tobacco industry was before they were aggressively litigated against. And I don't think there's an easy answer. I don't think there's a simple ethical or legal argument yet that allows us to flick a switch and make this work. I get all that. But I don't think we as a society are at a point where we can allow a very small group of monopolies to inflict as much harm as they are inflicting.
Wait, I will give it to you, but I need to quickly clarify. I'm not a complete pessimist who thinks that human beings are like terrible, awful creatures, but I do think that you do. Okay, but I do think that the platforms have now incentivized this and are taking advantage of it. Hani.
I think it's Erwin.
Oh, sorry, Erwin.
I think that there's an enormous difference between regulating automobile safety and regulating tobaccos, which is also at the end of the film, and regulating the internet. And the difference is that automobiles and tobacco aren't about speech, but when you're dealing with the internet, you're dealing with speech. And so automatically you're in the realm of the First Amendment. So I think it's not an apt comparison. I have real problems with this distinction between content and design, or how you're saying it takes advantage of people psychologically. When we watch a scary movie, is the fact that they're using devices to make it suspenseful and scary content or design? When a newspaper is laid out to make us want to go to read inside, is that content or design? When the cover of the book makes us want to pick up and read the book, is that content or design? And so that's why I don't find the distinction in content and design to be a persuasive one at all. And I disagree with you very much when you said, and these were your words, that YouTube is trying to radicalize. I think YouTube is a platform I don't think that their goal is to
Or not
radicalize
their
people.
goal, but I think their recommender system is trying to get people to click, and people are clicking on content that is shocking, and the users
the
know that,
content,
and it's
they're-
reinforcing
and
the design in the speech to
And they're clicking
go
on
for
the content of the little kid who's an influencer with regard
I
to
know,
toys,
why am I,
too.
now I am the pessimist. Like, not seeing the good.
This is my point, that speech can be good or bad. This is just the medium for more speech. And when there's more speech, there's going to be more good speech, and there's going to be more bad speech. But I'm very skeptical there's a way to regulate the bad without losing the good, without violating the First Amendment.
Okay. I love listening to Erwin talk. I mean, but I really think there's a few things I want to disagree with. So one is, you started off by saying the internet has been the biggest boom for free speech since the printing press. And I think I see why you say that, but I don't think it's true, and here's why. On the internet today, there's something that we call the 95-5 rule, which is that 90% of content is produced by a very small number of people, right? So on Twitter, for example, something like 90% of tweets come from less than 10% of users. So in fact, most of the people are consuming content, not speaking the content. And so I don't actually think it's been a big boom. I think it's been a megaphone for a small number of some interesting, some less interesting people.
And I was going to say that 10%, 9% are bots. All run by the
yeah,
same
that's right.
company.
Sorry, that's a whole
So they're not
nother
even people.
story,
Can
right?
I
That's
respond
right.
to that?
Yes, please.
That assumes that consuming information is not First Amendment activity, and it is, because
Well,
the
I'm not gonna
Supreme
argue
Court has
about the
always
First
said,
Amendment.
but it is, but the ability to receive information is important to the First Amendment, is the ability to express oneself. And the amazing thing about the internet is the way in which it gives us unprecedented access to information. And I cannot think of any other medium that gives us the ability to access all the great museums of the world, gives us the ability to access newspapers from all the world, and gives us the ability to access incredible hate platforms too.
Okay.
But all of that is a First Amendment right to receive information.
I understand that, but I was taking issue with the idea of the expression part of that, which is more about the speech part, so I take your point. But let me come back to the design thing, because I really disagree that you can't disentangle design and content. So here's why. You gave some nice examples. Well, if the way I design the cover of the book, is that design or content? That's content. Everything that's in that piece is content. But here's what design is, right? That when I go to YouTube, it's flashing these cute little thumbnails to get me to click more. That's not a content issue. That is not the creator of that content did something. That's how YouTube did it. And by the way, what they also do is they find the frame in the video that they think will be most engaging to you. So for example, right now, if you go to Netflix and you see all the thumbnails, you get a thumbnail of a TV show or movie, those are not random. Those are designed for you. They are designed on your past viewing habits. That's not a content issue. That's them saying, what is the thing
The trigger that
the
gets you to
trigger
click.
that's going to get you to click on this?
I think you're confusing what's the content with who creates the content. The flashing lights is the content.
No, that's
now
YouTube. That's not the creator.
No. YouTube may be the one who's created the flashing lights. So YouTube would be the creator of that,
Yes.
and that might raise Section 230 issues.
Good.
But the flashing lights are still the content.
Right.
So we may want to separate what the person who created the video does
Good.
versus what YouTube does, but both are content.
100%. They are both content. But when YouTube creates the content, that doesn't fall under the shield.
I think
On this
that's
we
right.
agree.
On
And
this we
that's
agree.
what I'm talking about. And so maybe I'll put aside the design content. I am saying that YouTube is in the content creation business, not just the creators. And they are mixed together, and we've given them the shield for the whole thing.
I think that if we went back 15, 20 years and had a crystal ball and could see that the flow of most of the world's information was going to be controlled, not facilitated, but controlled by a very small group of very wealthy tech monopolies who are not in the First Amendment business, but in the let's make as much money as humanly possible by any means necessary business, I think it would drop our jaws to the floor. I have a really hard time seeing, I completely agree, and again, not being, but you don't have to be a legal expert. I think it's really, if you really look closely at these issues as you have, and obviously you have, and even as a punter, it's really easy to see that these are not easily fixed or even possibly fixed conundrums.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of, I end up getting into arguments with sides I'm not even on with people because they're like, well, do you not care about children? How could you say this bill is bad? And you're like, no, I thought I was on your side, but maybe I'm not.
By the way, I agree with you that the problem has gotten hard to fix, but part of that is because the technology sector has been stalling for 2 decades. And so they've gotten us to this point where like, well, it's so big now we don't know what to do. And I think that's on them though, because they have been using stalling tactics.
Well, do you agree that there is any future in which, and this is where, because I agree with Erwin, obviously, I mean, I knew this when we made the film and we were alluding to those industrial examples at the end, that this is not apples to apples, right? That obviously this is not the tobacco industry. Obviously this is not the automotive industry. That's why this is a thorny problem and there isn't just a very easy, obvious fix for it.
Yeah.
But from an ethical standpoint, it feels like we have to be navigating towards a future in which there is a way to litigate for harms that are intentionally monetized by these companies. Mm-hmm. And in many cases perpetrated specifically by these companies. Yeah. And we're not in that world at all. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And instead, the world that we're in, which is scary to me, is this weird litigate them in these terms that are don't even have anything to do with what they actually do, which is scary because those aren't going to go anywhere because they don't hold legal water.
Yeah. Can I give an example here? So you all met Carrie Goldberg in the film, the lawyer, and this is public. Amazon, for a period of time, was offering a very high potency chemical, I can't remember the name right now, essentially to people who wanted to commit suicide. So they would go on, they would look for this, and Amazon, in addition, when you put that into your cart, it recommended anti-nausea medicine. So you could really go through with it. And several people committed suicide in this way. And Carrie Goldberg has several lawsuits from families against Amazon saying that their recommendation of this was harmful to people. So I want to get to Erwin and your point, Alex, of what can we do? Can we hold these companies liable for, clearly, this is essentially delivering a suicide kit. And it was mostly to teenagers. And to make you even more sad, they would use their Visa gift cards they got from their grandparents for Christmas so that their parents couldn't see the transaction. I know I've ruined your day, totally. But Erwin, what can we do in this space?
I want to draw the distinction between Amazon selling a product, assuming that's what was going on.
It's a legal product.
It's a legal product?
Legal. It's legal. Mm-hmm. It's used in tanning of leathers.
Okay. I think we should make that product illegal, which there's no First Amendment problem with. And then we can certainly stop advertising of illegal products. But if Amazon is selling the product and selling the product in a way that's foreseeable going to lead to that harm.
Because they're recommending this
well, but
that's
different, though, than what we've been talking about so far. I think where it becomes much harder is if somebody goes onto YouTube and says, if you want to commit suicide, this is what you should do. I don't think YouTube can be held liable for that. I think Amazon, for selling the product, can be held liable for doing that.
Okay, this is a good distinction
on
here.
this we agree. We agree on this, yeah.
Okay, so we have a few minutes left before we want to open it up, about 7 or 8 minutes. And I want us to get into a discussion, 2 things. First, it sounds like we're never going to come to a consensus on how we can change Section 230 in any meaningful way.
There isn't one. I mean, Section 230 is the thorniest debate going. Right
so
now.
what can we do? And I'd love to hear from each of you. What do you think are the key, either technical or potential policy interventions? And I have some ideas. I'll throw one out quickly. I think one policy intervention is we need more transparency in what's happening on these platforms. Researchers like us and other individuals should be able to get access to the data to be able to better understand what's happening on here. Let us help you build a recommender system that creates more pro-social content. And really what's terrible is we're seeing more of these platforms closing up and not giving us access to their application programming interface. And it's clear why. They don't want us looking under the hood to see what's happening because there's a fear that government will step in, But at the same time, there are real social risks that we need to be able to document and address. So I'll go to each of you, if you could think of any policy or technical interventions.
Can I tell a story?
Erwin?
Please, please.
Hani and I did a program together for federal judges a little over a year ago. We sat down together at lunch to face this question. And Hani gave me the suggestion that what we could do is improve the filtering devices that exist for speech that's not protected by the First Amendment. Because already Section 230 doesn't apply to child sexual exploitation material. It doesn't apply to incitement. And what Hani told me was that the techniques that are used for filtering were designed a long time ago. There's much better techniques for filtering that could be used now. And so that doesn't deal with a lot of the awful speech on the internet, but at least deals with a subset that's already illegal where there's no First Amendment issue. We wrote an op-ed for it. We couldn't get a newspaper to pick it up. But I think we should go back and do that again.
Okay.
But it was your suggestion. Yeah. I think it's such a good one because it doesn't raise First Amendment issues. I also want to agree, Brandy, with you in terms of the importance of transparency. And one of the things that California did, which I believe is constitutional, was, and this is Jesse Gabriel's bill, that required disclosure by platforms of what they do with regard to content moderation decisions. And there's all sorts of ways in which we require disclosures now. Think about when you go to a bar, the disclosures about the effects of alcohol, or places where there's dangerous chemicals, there have to be disclosures. There's disclosures that have to be posted in the workplace. And at least we would get more transparency. Last Friday, Elon Musk, in what's now called X, filed a lawsuit arguing that this unconstitutional is compelled speech. And I've certainly taken the position publicly, but I think that's wrong, that I think that this is permissible as disclosure as a way of getting more information.
Yeah, and then really quick to add on to this, there are several pieces of legislation that have been proposed to try to force platforms to be more transparent. In the United States, one is called PATA, the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act. It is stalled now, but I have hopes that it will be reintroduced at the federal level. It's also been introduced in the California legislature. But the European Union passed the Digital Services Act, which has a mechanism for independent researchers and auditors to be able to gain access to data. And that includes US-based researchers. You don't have to be an EU-based researcher. So we're starting to build some of these mechanisms.
And the only thing is to say, I think your movie is so important. The documentary is a way of exposing this so people become better informed. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I mean, that's what I was going to say, is just that it's not about our film being important, but but why we make films, right? Why we make documentaries is we're dealing with this with the labor strike in Hollywood right now, which is really a national, or I would say a global labor crisis, and not even just about show business, which is largely to do with a lack of transparency and with a kind of intransigence on the part of large corporations that do not want to open their books and their mechanisms up to anyone for profit, and that is a problem. And I think one of the best ways to fight that problem is awareness, because there's nothing better than activating lots of people. And it doesn't mean that. That's the thing. Sometimes I'll encounter that when I'm making a doc or a topical doc. It's like, but you didn't tell us what to do. And I was like, that's not my job, you know? And I don't know what to do. I mean, I have my own opinions about what to do that I implement in my own way every day, and even the way I parent my kids. But that may not be right for you, and it may not be your purview. So it just takes one person to go, oh, right, let's do this, or I'll do that, or I'll enter this form of activism or this form of law. But it's got to start with an awareness, and there's a great deal of lobbying and other forms of propaganda and of obfuscating on the part of these companies, which are bad things that they're doing, inarguably, to prevent people from being activated, because they know that eventually it will cost their bottom line. And that's where we are at the moment in many areas of industry, but certainly in the tech industry.
Hani, leave us on a good note, please.
Anybody who knows me knows it's unlikely. Before moving to Berkeley, I was a professor at Dartmouth College, and Dartmouth College is known for a very big fraternity and sorority culture. Vast majority of students are there. And it reminds me a little bit about the internet. Lots of good things come from fraternities and sororities, and lots of really bad things. And there was pressure on campus to ban the fraternities. And you know, anytime you get in the business of a bunch of old people telling a bunch of young people you can't do something, it's going to end badly. And I remember a discussion where we were sitting around trying to figure out, what do you do with fraternities? It was that same thorny issue. And somebody had a really good suggestion, is you have to create a better option, right? You don't ban something, you make something better, and they just naturally migrate there. And I think the same thing can happen, is that we are stuck right now with YouTube and Twitter and TikTok and Facebook. And I think most people don't like it, but they don't have a better option. But why don't they have a better option? Because we have these now trillion-dollar companies with massive power, network effect, and it's very hard to get new businesses to compete at this scale. I don't think antitrust is the best way to solve these problems, but I think if we can start to force these companies to contain where they are and not bat down every single thing that comes up by either buying them or competing with them, we might create a more healthy online ecosystem where let the market of ideas work. Because I think these ideas are not very good. And I think if we gave people the opportunity for something better, my hope is that they would go there.
Yeah, one thing that happened during COVID really quick was I noticed I had my son, my youngest was I think only like 9 or so, and I've always kept an eye on what he was doing online because he lives online. And COVID hit, and I noticed he was just on Discord 24 hours a day, and I was like, oh my God, what are you doing? Right, and he's like, well, it's COVID, and I can't see any of my friends, and most of our social media is filled with lunatics, and I can build my own server, and I can invite only who I want into the server, and I can silo out, this is 9.
Yeah.
I can silo out any of the lunatics and only have my friends here, and this is how we play all day. I was like, have fun. Close. And that's what's kind of happening. Like Musk took over Twitter and dismantled it immediately, and everyone just scattered, and they went to Mastodon and Blue Sky.
Mastodon is like this, where you have your own little group, your own server, and you can have your own rules.
And we're in a way, we're going back to the way the internet was when I first got on in the 80s, where you had no problem moving between different groups of people in these different rooms, and you didn't feel you had to be siloed in one space. And I think that most likely is the way things will gravitate.
And I see
But
everyone
there's
wants to
my
say
question.
something.
This is a question for both of you, and it's not an argument. But when Elon Musk took over Twitter, these alternatives did develop like Mastodon. My sense is that they haven't developed very successfully. If what you're saying is right, why haven't they
But
developed?
Twitter
It's
was
very early.
crap for a decade. Like it had to build over time.
Yeah,
and-
it took
and
a very long time
They're
to
going
scale.
to have to
Very
build over
long
time.
I think it's still too early to say. And
Okay.
I think if I had to make a prediction, and I don't like making predictions, but I think Alex is right, I think we're going to move away from these big centralized this is, like, I think Elon Musk got this exactly wrong, that he's going to build a universal app. We are going in exactly the opposite direction, where we're picking these things like, here's my cycling friends, and here's my...
It's what happened in Hollywood. I think it's the big mistake the studios made that got us into this labor mess, where they saw what the internet was doing, and they were like, let's copy them. Everybody wants to be online. Let's kill the movie industry. Let's kill the linear TV industry, which was their only way of monetizing. And the fact is like, because I have kids, it's easy for me to see that new generations are multi-platform. You know, they don't need to abandon the movie theater because they like gaming, right? They don't need the YouTube, which is scaring the heck out of everyone in Hollywood. Yes, someone may have 100 million, Mr. Beast may have way more followers than Brad Pitt, but that doesn't mean people don't want to see Brad Pitt. It just means they also want to see Mr. Beast. And I just think that's a kind of generational disconnect that's going on, where like a lot of young people don't care at all about being sort of in multiple areas. They don't need to be fed through one central portal.
Exactly. And as a reminder, I mean, for questions, we have the mics here. I'm seeing some people. Yeah, and you can start to queue up. You can go ahead. Yeah, and I think you can just take it off. Yeah. It's on. I think. No. May I see it? Yeah, there you go.
Hi.
me see
First of all, thank you for a great movie. It was really thought-provoking and terrible. It was terribly thought-provoking. But progress, or I guess things move on. Susan Wojcicki is out at YouTube. Google's now being called up for antitrust. It would, you have to mention the advent of TikTok. And, I'm really concerned because I think as a longtime user of YouTube, and my son uses TikTok, there's been an erosion of user autonomy, where the choices are really made for you. And in YouTube, like you said, when you bring it up, there's a 0 click. Everything's sort of filled in for you. You don't really even get to choose to click. It's sort of done for you. And I'm wondering what are your thoughts about that? And is anyone picking up the torch to sort of carry on? Because even just in the time that you did this, things have gone so much further ahead, right? So sort of what comes next?
I'll just answer really quick and then open up anyone else who wants to answer. I don't think anything's changed that much. I don't think TikTok is a meaningful competitor to YouTube. And I don't think that Susan leaving has anything to do with anything. And I don't think that this antitrust case is going to go anywhere. So I think the status quo. I think YouTube is growing exponentially. It is by far the largest media platform on the planet with no competitor in sight. And I think it's very hard to compete with Google because of their lobbying power. So I would say YouTube is here to stay, and that there may be competitors and there may be services that offer what you're looking for, which is more autonomy. But it's hard to replicate a service that has basically all of humanity's recorded media on it, which is that ain't TikTok, right? So I don't think I think Google is untouchable at the moment, personally. I don't think any of these cases are going to go anywhere. I think Susan's been there forever, so I think she probably just got tired.
Yeah, probably. Sick of
To be fair to her, it's like the president. Who would want that job?
So, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Over the past few years, much of the most odious ideologues have been banned from platforms like Alex Jones or Nick Fuentes, or the more odious ones. Do you think this deep platforming has been effective in managing the harm they create?
Well, Hani's going to have a
Well, I think the problem with the deplatforming is it comes too late. We banned Alex Jones after he had already become Alex Jones, and he became a martyr, and people would bring him on. And so the problem is, you don't want to do it too soon because you're overreacting, but I think we wait way too long. Look at QAnon. Like, we finally kicked QAnon off the major platforms, but it had become a world phenomenon. So I think it didn't work, but for the reason that YouTube dragged its feet dealing with these problematic users. But here's the thing, too, is that I don't actually think you have to deplatform people. I think you just have to stop recommending them. This is a gift on the internet. If you exist on page 30 of a Google search, do you really exist on the internet? So you don't have to ban people.
wait a minute.
Sorry. Hold on, let me check that. So
40.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm fine with the deplatforming with the particularly bad characters, but I think it's even easier than that, which is that you promote the content that is more thoughtful and less hateful, and then let people mouth off on the internet if they want. And if you're going to find it, you're going to find it anyway.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And the thing that I noticed while we were working on the film was, and someone's about to speak who pioneered a lot of this stuff, was that a lot of this was not algorithmic, but parasocial. It was really about the relationship between the end user and whoever they were talking to. So, or in a kind of imagined relationship with. And so if YouTube is pushing Steven Crowder, which they still are, who's calling for civil war after the FBI, executed a perfectly legal warrant on Trump, to millions and millions and millions of followers and is heavily advertised, do we need to be doing that? And I think that, you and I were talking about this before, and this goes back to the ratio you mentioned. There's a very small group of bad actors on YouTube. It's very small. It's the amount of promotion they get because it's monetizing like crazy for YouTube for their ad revenue.
And we're going to ping pong, so we'll go here.
Hey, is this on?
Yes.
Yes, it is. Great film, thank you. And my question speaks exactly to the bad actors question. I am liberal, I'm as likely as progressive as anyone in the room.
You are in Berkeley. I
yeah,
don't know if
exactly.
you're
There
the
is
most
that
liberal
too.
person in the room.
How Berkeley can you be, right?
Yeah.
The question is, in your research and the work you were doing as you were developing the film, were you looking for bad actors from the left? And
Yeah.
were they taking advantage and finding success?
Yeah, boy, was that hard. Honest to God, and there's a lot of people on the left who annoy the crap out of me. So it's not like I'm ideologically predisposed, but we're talking about incitement to violence, and this gets into that sort of both sides. Trump's famous "there's bad people on both sides" quote from Charlottesville, when there were very clearly not bad people on both sides. So. There are ideological things going on that are funded by very wealthy ideological players for very specific reasons, which is why the film ended with Jan 6. That happened while we were working on the film. We found our way to data that showed how YouTube was the largest purveyor of incitement to that event of any of the other platforms. And that is just a statistical fact. So I think that there hasn't been the same degree of violence, the Christchurch shooting in New Zealand and the killing of 52 Muslim people, largely, promoted, sort of incited by Stefan Molyneux. These are very violent far-right people, but you could call them extremists, for lack of a maybe less partisan way of calling it, but they are far-right extremists.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for this panel. Super interesting discussion. Alex, great film. Thank you for making it. My question, I think, is mostly probably for Dean Chemerinsky, but I'd be happy to hear from anyone that wants to comment on it. Talking about transparency, you made the offline analogy of disclosures for things like food and alcohol. Why does this offline analogy work as opposed to automobiles or cigarettes? And my second question is, what do you make of the argument that if we were to require someone like the New York Times to disclose the way they make their content, a lot of us would be very upset about that. How's that different than requiring disclosures from tech companies?
As to the first question, I think there's a difference between disclosure and regulation. I think if the California law regulates the content of what's on the social media platforms, it violates the First Amendment and it would be preempted by Section 230. That's why I believe that the Florida and Texas laws are unconstitutional and saying that the platforms can't regulate content because that really is about controlling the speech. With regard to disclosure, so that's what to me is the difference between regulating the content of the internet and regulating automobiles and tobacco. Disclosure is different in that there are many ways in which we require disclosure already of things. And I think the question is, does the disclosure in this context infringe the First Amendment? It might infringe the First Amendment for one of two reasons. One is, which what the Elon Musk argument is that it's compelled speech. That when you're compelling people to engage in speech, that violates the First Amendment. But of course, any disclosure law is compelled speech by definition. The other is that in this area, compelled disclosure interferes with editorial discretion and that therefore it violates the First Amendment. And if that were so, then I would believe that it would be unconstitutional. But I have to say, whatever we would apply to the Twitter or now called X, Facebook, YouTube, we should be able to apply to the New York Times as well with regard to disclosure. I wouldn't treat the media differently. The question is that disclosure an impermissible intrusion in editorial discretion?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is such a fascinating conversation. I researched these topics from a sociological and historical perspective, and from my perspective, what's become pretty palpable that I think is missing sometimes in the legal discussions is the way that platforms have come to replicate broadcasting companies in many ways, that they have become new kinds of broadcasting companies. And for as long as mass media has been around, the speech of mass media has been regulated.
Ooh, can I take
and
this?
so I'm curious, when Section 230, was developed, that was not the case. But as soon as the monetization was introduced, as the documentary kind of, really thoughtfully untangled, that made things much more complex. So I'm curious to hear kind of from a legal and otherwise perspective, kind of where the role of broadcasting fits into all of
And in the
this.
spirit of full disclosure, this is Becca Lewis, who is also in the film and has done incredible work at Stanford.
Yeah, I have my PhD's in telecommunications.
Okay, so you want to talk about Red Lion and why it's not analogous
You can,
here?
you can, but I'm gonna talk about the scarcity rationale.
Okay, right.
You go first.
Traditionally, we haven't allowed regulation of the print media. And there was regulation of the broadcast media in a way that would never been allowed for the print media. And the Supreme Court in 1969, in a case called Red Lion Broadcasting versus FCC, said, we can have regulation of the broadcast media to have things like the fairness doctrine, the right to reply, because the broadcast spectrum is inherently
The scarcity
finite.
rationale.
The scarcity rationale. That doesn't apply when it comes to, if there's any media that's not scarce, it's of course the internet and social media. Now there are other regulations of the broadcast media which we've allowed, such as the
Equal
restricting
time
of,
rule.
I'm sorry?
Equal time rule.
Well, but that was
fairness
part
argument.
of Red Lion. I was focusing on things like the restriction on profane speech over the internet, indecent speech over television, radio, the George Carlin, the FCC versus Pacifica case. And it was based on this notion that the broadcast media is intrusive in the home and accessible to children. I don't think that case would come out the same way today. And it's only ever been applied to the free over-the-air broadcast media. It's never been applied to cable. It's never been applied to the internet. It's never been applied to telephones and the like. So my bottom line answer to your question is that what was allowed with regard to the broadcast media was based on a rationale that wouldn't be accepted today, and it doesn't have any relevance with regard to social media.
Yeah, and 1 second on that. The scarcity rationale is that we have this finite electromagnetic spectrum, so only certain numbers of licenses can go out. So not everybody has the opportunity to hold that license. So also, if you hold that license, you have an obligation to serve the public interest, convenience, and necessity. So there are other obligations placed on them, which is then how like the fairness doctrine, equal time rule, and there's other issues with that, but just to
But
provide.
surely the understanding of YouTube is that it is actually not a social media platform at all.
Yeah.
In fact, it really has no social media component whatsoever other than within the comments section. You can throw stuff back and forth at each other, which is an infinitesimally small fraction of how it is utilized. And the prior legal precedent notwithstanding, sort of like what I was saying earlier, like it or not, we're in a phase where YouTube and Google are well aware that they operate like a massive broadcast station. They understand this. They monetize based on their understanding of this. I worked at MTV when I was young, many decades ago. And in the early days of MTV, there was a similar thing going on where I would look at it and go, well, you guys are you're a TV channel. Like, no, we don't make the content. We just get it from the record label and we don't do anything other than put this stuff out, and it's not us. And eventually, a lot of people came down on MTV in terms of the impact they were having. And you can't even compare the scale, the difference between YouTube and MTV. So we are at a point where we are going to have to construct legal frameworks that deal with the reality of that. We have to.
I'm going to have to excuse myself
Yeah,
with
proceed.
apologies.
Yeah.
I'm having a large number of students over at my house for dinner.
Oh, my Lord.
And we promised Erwin he'd be out by 5.
Yeah.
So is this a question for Erwin? No.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Erwin,
Thanks,
thank you.
Erwin.
Thank you. That was
Thank you.
amazing.
No, you're fine.
Thank you.
And,
I don't want the students to get this before I do.
No, I understand.
and I think
Okay.
let's take the one last
We'll
question.
take one last question,
Here
sorry.
on this
I
side.
can be quick. No? Okay, fine. Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
No, you're please, you're welcome to go. Don't stay on my account. It's okay. Thank you so much for such a fantastically effective documentary. Really enjoyed it. I think documentaries in this genre are always a kind of a reminder of how well media-trained big tech can be. And I do agree with Hani and some of the viewpoints discussed today that they have been lax, and this is somewhat a technology problem, not just a societal problem. So I suppose my question is for you, Alex, and it's kind of, did you feel like pushing a little bit harder when you were talking to Susan Wojcicki? And were you at all thinking, for example, of mentioning that you'd spoken to Andy Parker about the Alison Parker case and asking some specifics and kind of making her feel a little bit more uncomfortable?
It's not my style. And I'll tell you why. And you should absolutely head out.
Yeah, you can leave. You can leave it
Because
there.
my
We'll
answer
let you
will
go.
not be short. I really don't like gotcha journalism. I don't think it's effective. And it's kind of like throwing chum to the sharks. You give the audience, it's like junk food. You give them what they want, but it's not the right.
Like YouTube?
There's no sustenance. There's no nutritional value to that. What I did do is I'm very transparent about what kind of film I'm making. So when I talked to Google Comms and YouTube Comms, I was very open about the fact. In fact, the deck I sent them had like pictures of like ISIS beheading people on YouTube and stuff. It was hardly subtle. It was honest, and I just said, look, this is what I want to talk about. These are the things I like about the platform. These are the things that are concerning, and I want to talk to her about it. However, the power of documentary, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people's, because the docs that I grew up liking the most, are not dismantling their subjects, because you don't have to. If you ask your subject a good, well-rounded group of questions and you have a camera very close on their face, their answers tell you everything. So I don't think anyone has watched this movie and thought, that I know of, that she wasn't wrestling with the implications of this platform. I don't think that you can watch this and think Steve Chen isn't wrestling with the implications of this platform. I think it's more powerful to let their eyes do that than for me to wag my finger in their face. And you know, especially like Andy Parker and things like that, sure. I mean, but I find that stuff, it's in a way it gives them an out because you end up sympathizing with them more than I probably want you to.
Tell them what the Google rep said in the email after the movie was released.
Can he?
Can you? Sorry about that. I can tell. I have tenure. I can say anything.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I think it's probably not the movie they were hoping I would make. I'll leave it at that.
When the cameras get turned off.
But I will say one thing. I will say that there was a subject in my film who kept using the term algorithm over and over and over again. And I've known this guy a very long time. And I said to him at one point, why do you keep using the word algorithm all the time when you and I both know that this isn't really about an algorithm? And he was like, well,
Projection.
Who's going to go up against these people? Mm-hmm. Right? Who's going to actually say that this is about people and not about this faceless code that no one can wrap their head around? Everybody is scared.
Wow.
Good question. Alex, what's next? What are you going to do next?
I'm working on a bunch of stuff, and I'm doing a lot of work around the strike because it's a big deal. So we're doing a lot of strike stuff to help get money to people who need money and stuff like that. It's going to go on for a while, I think.
Good. Well, on that note, good.
Thank you.
You for doing
Thanks,
that work. Thank you all for coming. You see me, I'm like.
I didn't realize that was the off the record.